I love you both so much.
I love you too, Mommy. Me too.
My sweet babies.
Those kids looks like me. Does it mean my ex-wife had been pregnant all this while?
5 years after their one-night stand, Millionaire sees her with twins who looked exactly like her. Distinguished viewers, welcome to Luxury True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more amazing real-life luxury stories. Now, let's get into the story. Cynthia Jones lived in the peaceful coastal town of Seabrook, California, where the sound of ocean waves and the calm rhythm of small-town life shaped her days. She was a young interior designer with a quiet passion for turning ordinary spaces into warm homes. Cynthia shared a modest cottage with her mother, Margaret Jones, a gentle librarian who had raised her alone after losing her husband many years earlier. Though they were not wealthy, their home was filled with warmth, books, laughter, and the comforting smell of Margaret's homemade bread. Cynthia spent most of her days working at a small design studio above a bakery in town. She loved sketching layouts, choosing colors, and imagining how families would live happily in the spaces she created. Her childhood friend Lucas Bennett often stopped by the studio to check on her, bringing coffee and teasing her about how seriously she took every design project. Cynthia simply smiled, explaining that homes were more than buildings, they were places where people built their lives and memories. Although Cynthia's life seemed simple, she quietly dreamed of something greater. She hoped one day her designs would reach big cities and inspire people beyond her small town. She believed in love, family, and new beginnings, even though she had never yet experienced the kind of life-changing romance she sometimes imagined while watching the sunset over the ocean. At that moment, Cynthia had no idea that her peaceful life was about to change in ways she could never have predicted. Far away from the quiet shores of Seabrook, the city of New York moved with a completely different energy. Towering skyscrapers filled the skyline, traffic roared through crowded streets, and the pace of life never slowed. At the center of that fast-moving world was Solomon Daniel, a 31-year-old businessman who had built one of the fastest-growing logistics technology companies in the country. His office sat on the top floor of a glass tower overlooking Manhattan, where meetings, negotiations, and billion-dollar contracts filled his daily schedule. Solomon was known as a man who rarely made mistakes. Calm, sharp, and incredibly focused, he had earned a reputation as one of the youngest and most successful entrepreneurs in the industry. Solomon's success, however, had not come without pressure. His father, Victor Daniel, was a powerful and demanding businessman who believed that success meant power, wealth, and legacy. From a young age, Solomon had been taught to work harder than everyone else and never allow emotions to cloud his judgment. While Solomon respected his father, the expectations placed on him had shaped him into a man who often buried his personal feelings beneath discipline and ambition. The only person who truly understood the man behind the businessman was his closest friend and business partner, Adrian Cole. Adrian had known Solomon since college and often reminded him that life should include more than just boardrooms and profit margins. One afternoon, while reviewing investment proposals in his office, Solomon received an invitation that would quietly begin to change his life. It was for a prestigious architecture and innovation conference in San Francisco, where investors and designers would meet to discuss new projects. Adrian encouraged him to attend, insisting it would be a good opportunity to step away from the relentless routine of New York. Solomon agreed, unaware that this simple decision would soon lead him to meet someone who would change the course of his life forever. The conference hall in San Francisco buzzed with energy as architects, investors, and designers gathered from across the country. Large screens displayed innovative building concepts while speakers discussed the future of urban living. Cynthia Jones moved quietly through the crowd, clutching a folder containing her presentation sketches. It was her first time attending such a major event, and although she tried to remain calm, she couldn't ignore the nervous excitement in her chest. For someone who usually worked in a small coastal studio, standing among some of the most influential people in design felt both thrilling and intimidating. Across the hall, Solomon Daniel had just finished greeting several investors when he noticed the young designer studying one of the display boards. Unlike the others around her who spoke loudly and confidently, she seemed focused and thoughtful, carefully examining the architectural models as if she could already imagine the stories that would unfold inside those buildings. Curious, Solomon walked closer and noticed the detailed sketches in her hands. When Cynthia accidentally dropped a few of her papers, Solomon instinctively bent down to help her gather them. As he handed them back, their eyes met briefly, and for a moment the noise of the conference seemed to fade into the background. They introduced themselves politely, expecting the conversation to last only a minute. Instead, they found themselves discussing design ideas, city planning, and their different perspectives on what made a home truly meaningful. Cynthia spoke passionately about creating spaces that brought comfort and warmth to families, while Solomon shared his interest in investing in projects that could transform communities. The conversation flowed naturally, surprising both of them. By the time the next presentation began, neither of them realized that their unexpected meeting had quietly begun a connection that would soon grow far deeper than either of them imagined. After the conference presentations ended for the day, many attendees gathered for a formal networking dinner inside a grand hotel overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The hall was filled with elegant lights, quiet music, and conversations between investors and designers discussing future projects. Cynthia initially planned to leave early, feeling out of place among the wealthy guests. However, just as she was preparing to step outside for some fresh air, Solomon approached her with a calm smile and asked if she would join him for a walk along the waterfront instead of staying in the crowded hall. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of the ocean as they walked along the quiet promenade beside the bay. Away from the loud conversations of the conference, their discussion became more personal. Cynthia spoke about growing up in the peaceful town of Seabrook with her mother and how she had always loved sketching houses by the sea. Solomon listened carefully, intrigued by the simplicity and warmth of her life. In return, he shared pieces of his own story, how he had spent most of his life in the competitive business world of New York and how success had often required sacrifices he rarely talked about. For the first time in a long while, Solomon found himself enjoying a conversation that had nothing to do with business deals or corporate strategies. As the city lights reflected across the water, both of them realized how comfortable they felt in each other's presence despite having just met. Cynthia admired Solomon's determination and intelligence, while Solomon was drawn to her sincerity and gentle optimism. Before they parted that night, Solomon asked if she would be willing to spend the next day exploring the city together before the conference resumed. Cynthia hesitated for a moment, surprised by the invitation, but something about the way he spoke made her feel safe enough to agree. Neither of them realized that this simple decision would begin a relationship that would soon change both of their lives in ways they could never have predicted. The next day, Solomon kept his promise and met Cynthia early in the morning outside her hotel. Instead of attending the first conference session, he suggested they explore the city together. They walked through the lively streets of San Francisco, visited quiet cafes, and spent hours talking as if they had known each other for years. Cynthia showed Solomon some of her sketch ideas for future home designs, explaining how she believed every house should reflect the life and dreams of the people who lived inside it. Solomon admired the way she spoke with such passion and sincerity. For a man used to conversations about profits and investments, Cynthia's perspective felt refreshing and genuine. As the day passed, their connection deepened. They shared stories about their childhoods, their ambitions, and the paths that had brought them to that moment. Solomon told Cynthia about the pressure of leading a powerful company and living under the expectations of his demanding father, Victor Daniel. Cynthia listened carefully, offering thoughtful encouragement that Solomon rarely received from people in his world. In return, Solomon admired Cynthia's quiet strength and the way she had built her career step by step without losing her kindness. What began as a simple meeting at a conference was slowly turning into something neither of them could ignore. By the end of the conference, Solomon knew he didn't want their connection to end with a goodbye. Over the following months he traveled often to California, finding reasons to visit Seabrook and spend time with Cynthia. Their relationship grew naturally, built on trust, laughter, and shared dreams. Eventually, during a quiet evening by the ocean where they had once walked together, Solomon asked Cynthia to marry him. Though surprised by how quickly their love had grown, Cynthia could see the sincerity in his eyes. With hope in her heart and dreams of a future together, she said yes, unaware that their love would soon face challenges neither of them expected. After their wedding, Cynthia moved to New York and began adjusting to a life very different from the quiet simplicity of Seabrook. Solomon's world was filled with luxury apartments, formal dinners, and endless business meetings. At first, everything felt exciting and new. Solomon tried his best to make Cynthia feel comfortable in the large penthouse overlooking the city skyline, and during the early months of their marriage they were happy. Cynthia continued working as an interior designer, gradually building connections in the city while Solomon focused on expanding his company. Despite the busy lifestyle, they often found peaceful moments together in the evenings, sharing quiet dinners and talking about the future they hoped to build. However, their peaceful beginnings soon faced pressure from Solomon's family, especially his father, Victor Daniel. Victor was a powerful man who valued legacy and reputation above everything else. During family dinners he often asked Solomon about the future of the Daniel family name, hinting that it was time for Solomon to have children. At first Cynthia tried to ignore the comments, believing they would eventually fade with time. But Victor's expectations became more direct and uncomfortable, making Cynthia feel as though she was constantly being judged. Solomon attempted to reassure her that the pressure from his father meant nothing to him, but the constant conversations about heirs slowly began to create tension between them. Months passed, and Victor's impatience only grew stronger. He frequently reminded Solomon that a successful man should secure the future of his family. Although Solomon loved Cynthia, the repeated pressure began to affect his thoughts more than he realized. Cynthia sensed the growing strain but tried to remain hopeful, believing their love would be strong enough to overcome any outside expectations. Neither of them knew that the pressure surrounding their marriage would soon lead them into a misunderstanding that would change their lives completely. As the pressure from Solomon's family continued to grow, Cynthia suggested they visit a doctor simply to ensure everything was fine. She believed that taking the step together might calm Victor Daniel's constant concerns and remove the tension surrounding their marriage. Solomon agreed, though the situation already weighed heavily on his mind. They scheduled an appointment with a respected fertility specialist in New York. The clinic was quiet and professional, and both of them tried to remain hopeful while waiting for the medical evaluations to be completed. The examination process took several days. Doctors conducted various tests and assured the couple that results sometimes required patience. However, when the initial report was discussed, the explanation from the doctor was cautious and complex. The physician mentioned that conception might take time and that further observation would be needed before reaching any definite conclusions. Cynthia listened carefully, understanding that the results were not final. But Solomon, already influenced by his father's relentless expectations, interpreted the words differently. In his mind, the uncertain diagnosis sounded like confirmation of what he feared most, that Cynthia might not be able to give him the family his father demanded. Instead of discussing his worries openly, Solomon allowed doubt to grow inside him. The pressure from Victor, the uncertainty of the medical results, and his own pride slowly clouded his judgment. Cynthia sensed the change in his behavior but did not fully understand its cause. She tried to reassure him that patience and trust would lead them through the situation, yet Solomon's thoughts had already begun drifting toward frustration and disappointment. What should have been a moment for them to support each other quietly became the beginning of a misunderstanding that would soon lead their marriage toward a painful turning point. Several weeks after the hospital visit, Solomon attended an extravagant charity gala organized by some of New York's most influential business leaders. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, expensive suits, and elegant gowns as powerful figures from finance and technology gathered to celebrate philanthropy and prestige. Solomon stood among them with the confidence expected of a successful entrepreneur, but internally he felt restless. The uncertainty surrounding his marriage and the pressure from his father lingered heavily in his mind, making it difficult for him to enjoy the evening. During the event, Solomon was introduced to a woman named Pamela Kendrick. She appeared charming and confident, speaking with the ease of someone used to moving through wealthy social circles. Pamela presented herself as an independent socialite who attended charity events and high-profile gatherings. She listened carefully as Solomon spoke about business and casually offered words of sympathy when he briefly mentioned the stress in his personal life. Pamela seemed attentive and understanding, qualities that made Solomon feel unexpectedly comfortable in her presence. While their conversation appeared harmless on the surface, Pamela had quickly recognized Solomon's influence and wealth. Over the following days, Pamela continued finding opportunities to appear in Solomon's social circle. She often spoke kindly to him and pretended to admire his achievements. Solomon, distracted by his frustration and growing doubts about his marriage, began spending more time around her than he realized. Meanwhile, Cynthia remained at home, unaware of the subtle shift taking place in Solomon's life. Pamela's presence slowly grew stronger, quietly positioning itself between Solomon and the woman he had once promised to love forever. The distance between Solomon and Cynthia grew slowly but noticeably. What had once been warm conversations and shared dinners became quiet evenings filled with tension. Solomon spent more time at work or attending social events, while Cynthia remained in the penthouse feeling increasingly alone. She could sense that something had changed in her husband, but every attempt to discuss it seemed to end in frustration. Solomon, overwhelmed by the pressure from his father and the doubts created by the misunderstood medical results, began convincing himself that their marriage had no future. One evening, after another argument about family expectations and the uncertainty surrounding children, Solomon made a decision that would change everything. Believing that Cynthia could never give him the heir his father demanded, he told her he wanted a divorce. The words struck Cynthia with a shock she could barely process. She tried to explain that the doctors had never given a final conclusion and that they simply needed patience, but Solomon's mind had already hardened. Hurt and disbelief filled the room as Cynthia realized the man she loved had allowed doubt to overpower their years of trust. Heartbroken and unable to fight his decision any longer, Cynthia quietly agreed to leave. Within weeks, the legal process was completed, and their marriage ended as suddenly as it had begun. Cynthia returned to her hometown of Seabrook, seeking comfort in the only place that had ever felt like home. Yet shortly after arriving, her life took an unexpected turn. During a routine medical visit, Cynthia received news that left her both shocked and emotional. She was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a mixture of joy and sorrow, knowing the man who should have shared that moment with her was no longer by her side. 5 years passed, and life changed in ways neither Solomon nor Cynthia could have predicted. Cynthia remained in Seabrook and quietly rebuilt her life. Her small interior design studio slowly grew into a respected business known for creating beautiful family homes along the California coast. More importantly, she had given birth to twins, a boy named Oliver and a girl named Olivia. The children were lively, curious, and full of energy. They inherited Cynthia's warm smile, but their sharp eyes and confident expressions often reminded her of the man she once loved. Cynthia devoted herself completely to raising them, determined to give them a peaceful childhood filled with love and stability. Meanwhile, Solomon Daniel's career had reached extraordinary heights. His company expanded internationally, and his name frequently appeared in business magazines and financial news. Despite the fame and success, a quiet sense of emptiness followed him through the years. His relationship with Pamela Kendrick eventually collapsed after he discovered the truth about her deceptive lifestyle, and he forced her out of his life immediately. Although Solomon tried to focus on work, he often found himself thinking about the mistakes he had made in the past, especially the decision that had ended his marriage with Cynthia. One afternoon, while visiting California for a business meeting, Solomon decided to take a walk through a large city park to clear his mind. Children played across the green lawns, while families enjoyed the warm sunshine. As Solomon walked past a playground, something suddenly caught his attention. A woman stood nearby watching two young children laughing as they chased each other across the grass. The moment Solomon looked closer, his steps slowed in disbelief. The woman was Cynthia Jones. But what shocked him even more were the twins beside her, two children who looked astonishingly familiar. Their faces, their expressions, even the way the boy held his head carried a striking resemblance to Solomon himself. For several seconds he stood frozen, staring at the scene before him, realizing that the past he thought he had left behind had suddenly returned to confront him. Solomon stood still beneath the shade of a tall oak tree, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. The two children running across the grass looked so much like him that it felt impossible to ignore. The boy, Oliver, had the same dark hair and focused gaze Solomon had seen in his own childhood photographs. The girl, Olivia, carried a quiet confidence and expressive eyes that felt strangely familiar. Solomon watched them for several minutes, noticing small details in the way they laughed, argued playfully, and ran back toward Cynthia with excitement. Every instinct in him told him that the resemblance was not coincidence. Cynthia, however, had not yet noticed Solomon standing nearby. She knelt to tie Olivia's shoelace while gently reminding Oliver not to run too far toward the lake. Her voice carried the calm warmth of a devoted mother. In that moment, Solomon realized how different she seemed from the woman he had known 5 years earlier. Cynthia looked stronger now, more confident, as if the years had shaped her into someone who had learned to stand firmly on her own. The realization stirred a deep mixture of regret and curiosity inside Solomon. He knew he needed answers, but approaching her suddenly felt far more difficult than any negotiation he had ever faced in business. Just as Solomon finally gathered the courage to step forward, Cynthia looked up and saw him. For a brief moment, both of them froze. Surprise flickered across her face before she quickly regained her composure. The twins noticed the silence and turned to look at the unfamiliar man standing nearby. Solomon could feel his heartbeat quicken as countless questions filled his mind. Were the children truly his? Had Cynthia known about the pregnancy when they divorced? And why had she never told him? The peaceful afternoon in the park suddenly felt heavy with unresolved history as the two former lovers faced each other for the first time in 5 years. Cynthia's eyes remained steady as she looked at Solomon, though the sudden encounter stirred emotions she had carefully buried for years. Oliver and Olivia stood beside her, curiously observing the tall stranger who seemed unusually focused on them. Cynthia gently placed a protective hand on each child's shoulder, instinctively keeping them close. Over the past 5 years she had built a peaceful life centered entirely around her children. Her design business had grown steadily, allowing her to create a comfortable home and stable future for them. Every day had been filled with school routines, bedtime stories, and quiet evenings by the ocean, simple moments that meant everything to her. The twins were the center of Cynthia's world. Oliver was energetic and adventurous, always asking questions about how things worked. Olivia was thoughtful and observant, often sitting beside her mother while she sketched design ideas. Cynthia had raised them with kindness and discipline, teaching them to respect others and value honesty. Although the children sometimes asked about their father, Cynthia always answered gently without revealing the painful history behind their family. She wanted them to grow up free from bitterness, even though part of her heart still carried the memory of the man standing only a few steps away now. Solomon struggled to find the right words as he looked from Cynthia to the twins. The resemblance was impossible to ignore, and the realization continued to grow heavier in his mind. Cynthia sensed the direction of his thoughts immediately. Calmly, she told the children to continue playing nearby while she spoke with their visitor. Oliver and Olivia ran back toward the playground, leaving the two adults standing in a silence filled with unspoken questions. Solomon finally broke the silence with a quiet voice, asking the question that had been forming in his mind since the moment he saw the twins. Cynthia met his gaze steadily, knowing the conversation they were about to have could change everything once again. Before Cynthia could answer Solomon's question, the sound of children laughing nearby reminded both of them that this conversation carried consequences far greater than either of their personal feelings. Solomon watched Oliver and Olivia running across the playground, and the resemblance continued to disturb his thoughts. His mind returned to the years after the divorce, when he had tried to convince himself that leaving Cynthia had been the correct decision. Yet standing there now, seeing the peaceful life she had built without him, made the belief feel painfully hollow. Solomon spoke carefully, his voice quieter than the confident tone he used in business meetings. He admitted that after the divorce his life had not turned out the way he expected. Pamela Kendrick, the woman who had entered his life during that difficult period, had eventually revealed her true nature. Solomon had discovered her secret when he unexpectedly returned to his apartment one evening and found her entertaining another wealthy guest while pretending to maintain a respectable image in public. The realization shocked him deeply. Furious and embarrassed by the deception, Solomon immediately forced Pamela out of his life and cut all connections with her. The incident left him questioning his judgment and the decisions he had made during the most important moment of his personal life. Since that day, regret had slowly followed Solomon through his success. Even as his company expanded and his name became more respected in business circles, the memory of the way he had ended his marriage continued to trouble him. Seeing Cynthia again now, stronger and surrounded by two children who looked remarkably like him, made the weight of his past mistakes even heavier. Solomon looked back toward the playground before returning his attention to Cynthia. With honesty he rarely allowed himself to show, he admitted that he had made terrible decisions years ago. But one question remained in his mind, and he needed the truth. He quietly asked Cynthia if the twins playing in the park were his children. Cynthia remained silent for a moment after Solomon asked the question. The afternoon breeze moved gently through the trees, while the distant laughter of Oliver and Olivia continued in the background. She had imagined this moment many times over the years, yet now that it had arrived unexpectedly, she carefully measured every word she would say. Looking directly at Solomon, she finally spoke with calm honesty. Yes, the twins were his children. Cynthia explained that shortly after returning to Seabrook following their divorce, she visited a doctor and discovered she was pregnant. The news had shocked her, especially after everything that had happened between them. Solomon listened in stunned silence as Cynthia continued. She told him that the pregnancy had been confirmed by Dr. Elaine Ramirez, the physician who had cared for her throughout those difficult months. The earlier medical consultation in New York had never concluded that she could not have children, it had only suggested that patience might be needed. But by the time the truth could have been clarified, Solomon had already ended their marriage. Cynthia admitted that she had considered telling him about the pregnancy at first, but his decision to walk away so firmly convinced her that he no longer wanted a life with her. Rather than reopen old wounds, she chose to raise the children on her own with the help of her mother. The explanation settled heavily over Solomon. Every detail confirmed what he had slowly begun to suspect, that the collapse of their marriage had been built on misunderstanding and impatience. As he looked again toward Oliver and Olivia, a wave of realization washed over him. For 5 years he had lived unaware that he had two children growing up across the country. The success he had achieved suddenly felt less meaningful compared to the years he had missed. Standing there in the quiet park, Solomon understood that the consequences of his past choices had reached far beyond his own life. The weight of Cynthia's words settled heavily on Solomon's mind. For several moments he said nothing, simply watching Oliver and Olivia playing across the park. The reality that he had missed 5 years of their lives felt overwhelming. Solomon, a man who had built his reputation on control and confident decisions, suddenly felt unsure of himself. He realized that his impatience and pride had not only destroyed his marriage, but had also separated him from his own children. Slowly, he turned back toward Cynthia, his expression filled with regret he could no longer hide. Cynthia, however, remained composed. The past had been painful, but the years of raising her children had also made her stronger. She explained that her priority had always been protecting Oliver and Olivia from unnecessary conflict. They had grown up surrounded by love from her, their grandmother Margaret, and the peaceful environment of their seaside town. Cynthia made it clear that while Solomon now knew the truth, her children's emotional well-being would always come first. She was not willing to allow their lives to be disrupted suddenly by the man who had once chosen to walk away. Solomon listened carefully, understanding that he had no right to demand anything. With humility he rarely showed, he told Cynthia he did not want to cause trouble in their lives. What he wanted, more than anything, was the chance to slowly become part of his children's world and make up for the years he had lost. Cynthia studied his face, searching for the sincerity behind his words. The man standing before her was no longer the confident husband who had once made a harsh decision without looking back. Instead, she saw someone who had begun to understand the consequences of his past, and who now hoped for a chance to repair what had been broken. Cynthia listened quietly as Solomon spoke, but her thoughts remained focused on the two small figures playing across the grass. Oliver and Olivia were still too young to understand the complicated history between their parents. To them, life had always been simple: school in the morning, drawing pictures at home, and weekend walks by the ocean with their grandmother. Cynthia had worked hard to give them a childhood filled with stability and warmth, and she refused to allow sudden changes to disrupt that peace. Turning back to Solomon, she explained calmly that if he truly wanted to know his children, it would have to happen slowly and carefully. Solomon understood her caution. He knew he had lost the right to demand trust. Watching Oliver chase a ball across the playground while Olivia laughed nearby stirred something deep inside him, a feeling he had never experienced before. These were his children, yet they did not know him. The realization hurt more than any business failure he had ever faced. He nodded and told Cynthia he would respect whatever boundaries she believed were necessary. If she allowed it, he would start by simply visiting and getting to know them as a friend rather than immediately revealing the truth. Cynthia studied him for a moment before responding. Over the years she had learned to read people carefully, especially when it came to protecting her children. Solomon's voice carried a sincerity she had never heard from him before. Finally, she agreed that he could spend a little time with the twins that afternoon under her supervision. She called Oliver and Olivia over, introducing Solomon as someone she had known a long time ago. The children greeted him politely, unaware of the deeper connection that existed between them. As Solomon knelt to speak with them, he felt both joy and regret mixing inside his heart, realizing that this small moment might be the first step toward rebuilding a family he had once lost. Oliver and Olivia quickly warmed to Solomon's presence. Children often judged people by simple kindness rather than complicated histories, and Solomon made a sincere effort to speak with them gently. Oliver excitedly explained the small toy airplane he carried everywhere, proudly describing how he wanted to become an engineer someday. Olivia, more observant and thoughtful, watched Solomon carefully before asking curious questions about where he lived and what he did for work. Solomon answered patiently, smiling in ways Cynthia had rarely seen during their marriage. For the first time, he experienced the simple joy of listening to children talk about their dreams. Cynthia stood nearby, quietly observing the interaction. Seeing Solomon with the twins stirred complicated emotions within her. Part of her remembered the man she had once fallen in love with, the man who had walked with her along the San Francisco waterfront years ago. Yet another part of her remembered the pain of the divorce and the lonely months of pregnancy that followed. She reminded herself that allowing Solomon to spend time with the children did not mean forgetting the past. It simply meant giving the twins the chance to know their father in a safe and careful way. As the afternoon continued, Solomon realized that redemption would require patience. He could not erase the years he had missed, but he could choose how he behaved moving forward. Before leaving the park, he thanked Cynthia for giving him the opportunity to meet the twins and promised he would respect her wishes regarding their future contact. Cynthia nodded, still cautious but recognizing that Solomon's attitude had genuinely changed. As Solomon walked away, he looked back once more at Oliver and Olivia playing together. For the first time in years, he felt a new purpose forming in his heart, the determination to become a father worthy of the children he had only just discovered. Just as Cynthia and the twins were beginning to return to their peaceful routine, an unexpected disturbance appeared. One afternoon, Solomon received troubling information from his longtime friend Adrian Cole in New York. Adrian had recently seen Pamela Kendrick again moving through wealthy social circles and quietly spreading rumors about Solomon's personal life. Pamela had always been drawn to influence and money, and learning that Solomon had children now connected to a successful designer only made the situation more tempting for her to exploit. Adrian warned Solomon that Pamela might attempt to involve herself again if she believed there was something to gain. The warning deeply concerned Solomon. He understood Pamela's manipulative nature better than anyone, and the thought of her interfering in Cynthia's life or the twins' peaceful childhood immediately alarmed him. Without hesitation, Solomon traveled back to California to speak with Cynthia privately. He explained the situation honestly, making it clear that Pamela might attempt to approach them or create unnecessary trouble. Cynthia listened carefully, her protective instincts immediately rising. She had worked too hard to build a calm life for Oliver and Olivia, and she refused to allow anyone from Solomon's past to disturb it. Together, they decided to take simple precautions. Solomon assured Cynthia that he would handle any problem Pamela might try to create and would not allow her to come anywhere near the children. Cynthia appreciated his directness, though the situation reminded her how complicated Solomon's world could be. Still, the way he openly took responsibility showed a change in the man she once knew. For the first time since their reunion, Cynthia felt that Solomon was not only trying to reconnect with his children, but was also willing to stand beside her to protect the family they had unexpectedly rediscovered. In the weeks that followed, Solomon kept his promise. He visited Seabrook regularly but never pushed beyond the boundaries Cynthia had set. Instead, he spent simple afternoons with Oliver and Olivia, helping them build model airplanes, walking with them along the beach, and listening to their endless questions about the world. The twins slowly grew comfortable around him, laughing easily in his presence. Cynthia noticed the change as well. Solomon was no longer the distant, impatient man who had once allowed pressure to control his decisions. He showed patience, kindness, and a genuine interest in the children's happiness. One evening, as the sun lowered over the ocean and painted the sky with soft shades of gold and pink, Cynthia sat quietly on the porch of her home while watching Solomon play with the twins in the yard. Oliver was proudly showing him a small kite he had built for a school project, while Olivia carefully explained how she had helped decorate it. Cynthia realized that over time Solomon had not only respected her wishes but had also proven that his desire to be part of their lives was sincere. The regret he carried was visible in the effort he made every single day. Later that night, after the children had gone inside, Cynthia spoke openly with Solomon. She admitted that the past had left deep scars, but she could also see the man he had become. Forgiveness would not erase what had happened, but holding on to bitterness would only harm their future, and the future of their children. With calm honesty, Cynthia told him she was willing to move forward slowly, focusing on what was best for Oliver and Olivia. Solomon listened quietly, grateful for the chance she was giving him. For the first time since their lives had unexpectedly crossed again, the possibility of healing began to feel real. Months passed, and the small coastal town of Seabrook gradually welcomed Solomon into its quiet rhythm. He no longer arrived as the powerful businessman from New York, but as someone learning to enjoy simple moments that had once been missing from his life. He attended the twins' school events, helped Oliver with his science project, and listened patiently while Olivia shared her latest drawings. Margaret Jones, who had initially been cautious about Solomon's presence, eventually recognized the sincerity in his efforts. The man who once broke her daughter's heart was now clearly trying to rebuild something meaningful. Cynthia also began to notice how much their lives had changed. Her design business continued to grow, and the home she had created for her children felt even warmer now that laughter filled it more often. She and Solomon spoke more openly about their past mistakes and the lessons they had learned. While they knew they could never erase the painful years behind them, they also understood that life had given them another chance, one built on patience, understanding, and shared responsibility for their children. One peaceful evening, the four of them walked together along the beach as the sun slowly disappeared beneath the horizon. Oliver and Olivia ran ahead across the sand, while Cynthia and Solomon followed behind at a relaxed pace. The sound of the waves filled the air, steady and calming. Solomon looked at Cynthia and quietly thanked her for allowing him back into their lives. Cynthia smiled softly, watching their children play in the fading sunlight. The road ahead would still require trust and effort, but for the first time in many years, both of them felt hopeful. What had once been broken had slowly begun to heal, opening the door to a new beginning for the family they had finally found again. And that brings us to the end of today's story. The world of luxury often hides stories deeper than what meets the eye. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories on Luxury Jewel Life Stories. Until our next story, take care and stay tuned for more.